Hello there, here we are again to make another video review, and today we're going to talk about a book that I just finished reading a few minutes ago, really. Breakneck by Dan Wang, China's Quest to Engineer the Future. Okay, so this is a really short book, not too long, 200 and something pages, really. 138. And quite big print as well. This was a book that was published last year. I got to know it because of some podcasts that I've listened to where the author was interviewed. The main idea that is behind this book is how, well, the title says it all, China's Quest to Engineer the Future. So the book is mainly making one thesis, that thesis being that China is the paradigm of what the author calls the engineering state. The engineering state is characterized by, being a state that its elites are engineers, and he explains how after Mao died in China during Deng Xiaoping and now during Xi Jinping's premiership, the Politburo, the ruling body of China, has been staffed by engineers mostly, and they bring this engineering mindset to the table of we've got to build big, we've got to do things, we've got to make bridges, we've got to make roads, we've got to make railroads, we've got to do heavy industry, we've got to bring the industry to China, and so on. And in the first chapter, this engineering society, which has, like these apparently scientific goals, and it has the means and the wherewithal of implementing these goals that are arrived at ruthlessly through any means necessary. This engineering society is contrasted with America. That's what chapter 1 does, engineers versus lawyers. So America, on the contrary, is a lawyerly society. It's explained that, from independence onwards, the ruling elite in the United States is basically lawyers. And the author doesn't talk that much about it, but in the last, I would say half a century or so, the influence of lawyers and the litigation about any sort of public works has become, really, really intense in the United States. And the idea is a lawyerly society is very good at protecting rights of individuals and, going to court so that individuals can defend their rights. Generally, the ones that get the better part of the deal here are the rich people, who are the ones who can pay the good lawyers and so on. And while this lawyerly society is very respectful of environmental norms, of individual rights, etc., it leads to stagnation, it leads to non-building, and that's a big problem in the United States. Specific examples are given, like the contrast between the fast railway that has been attempted or is in the works between, I think it's LA and San Francisco in California. This is a project that has gobbled down enormous amounts of money, billions at least. Many years, practically nothing has been built. And it's really difficult to go through all the legalistic steps, through all the controls, checks, ticking all the boxes. It's a nightmare. Another example that is given is how the money that previous President Biden wanted to invest in a massive public works series of schemes was basically wasted away, and nothing really was built. So two types of societies, a lawyerly society and an engineering society. After explaining the contrast, the author is mostly devoted to explaining how the engineering society works. I will advance already that, his thesis is that America needs to get a little bit more of the engineering spirit of China and to build back greater again. So in this, it aligns with itself with more recent books that have been published that I haven't read, but for example, Ezra Klein's Abundance is an attempt of getting the center left in the United States and the people close to the Democratic Party to adopt a more building stance, less regulatory, less lawyerly, and more, we just need to build housing, or we need to build public works. We need to do things. Not only just out of a fetishism for building things, it's the idea that, building housing, building roads, building infrastructure generates positive effects for the population. So, as I said, in the other chapters, the author mostly explores China. So he's saying America would benefit greatly from being a little bit more engineering. and of an engineering society, and on the other hand, China would benefit enormously from being a bit more respectful of rights and individuals and pluralism and those sorts of initiatives, which the engineering authoritarian state does not abide with at all. Of course, it's not a perfectly balanced case. It is clear that the author sympathizes more with the United States as a better society, both to be in and to work in. A lot of his family background also gets depicted here. His parents moved from Sichuan to Canada in, I don't remember if he says the dates, in the 80s maybe, yeah. And then they moved to the United States and so on. So the different chapters go on explaining, how this engineering society works. Chapters 2 and 3 are building big and tech power. These basically praise or highlight the good aspects of the engineering state. So in these chapters, we get an explanation of how China has been able to build these incredible industries, incredible railroads, mass transit, big projects which extend even to relatively peripheral provinces of China. And what else? This is contrasted with America's stagnation, an idea that is pushed through both in building big, with the infrastructure being built everywhere, and in the next chapter, tech power, especially in the next chapter, is this idea that the Americans have, that Americans invent and then the Chinese just copy and do second-rate products. This is completely false. China has become the workshop of the world. Most of the goods of heavy industry and even of light industry are being produced and exported there. Shenzhen is a major hub, and the idea is, while America has deindustrialized, China has been, building not only factories, but also human capital, big mass of workers that have a know-how that has been lost in America because there are no factories anymore there. And this know-how allows the work, is transferable. Like workers can move from one business to another. They can be working for Apple maybe and then move to a local mobile phone company, and then they can move on to a drone making factory. And they carry this expertise, and you have this pool of highly qualified labor that can be used as a springboard for pushing this industrial production forward. And with massive state support for heavy industries, China has been catching up. The greatest example is probably electric cars, where China has really completely cornered the market and swamped all other rivals. So these are the positive aspects of the engineering state, with lots of entrepreneurship and lots of state backing. It has its ups and downs. There are some criticisms here to how China has decapitated some of the services and sectors, some of the sectors connected to the internet, to selling goods, to social media, because of political reasons. So these are the strong advantages of the engineering state. Then chapters 4, 5, and to an extent 6, One Child, Zero COVID, and Fortress China, they present us the other side of the coin, and it's a pretty negative one. So like the engineering state with quasi-scientific principles, when it decides to build and to do something and to engage in a certain policy, it does so ruthlessly. And here it joins this engineering mentality with the fact that China is, after all, still a communist state, which is extremely authoritarian, with a party that has complete control over society, and that has become used to, since it took power in 1948, approximately. It has been accustomed to doing massive social engineering with many times disastrous consequences. So this book doesn't deal with the parts before the modern engineering state and then Xiaoping, but like chapter 4 is about the one-child policy and how it was brutally implemented based on the presumably scientific consensus of the day. This was the 60s, Treaty of Rome, I think. Ehrenfest's book, The Population Bomb, there was this idea that the world was overpopulated and that we needed to cut population drastically, which was a lot of nonsense. But China, being the engineering state and having a scientist in the top echelons that had absorbed this, they decided to pursue it ruthlessly. Chapter 4 is a really hard chapter to read. It's horrifying. Chapter 5, Zero COVID. This one surprised me because I didn't know anything at all about how China had really dealt with COVID, except for having very stringent lockdowns. This chapter explains how China's policy with COVID started off very effectively in the first year with very strict lockdowns, and showing the might of the engineering state when it puts its head on doing something. But then it went terribly awry. It tried to make a zero COVID policy that failed completely with the second wave of COVID. And this led to massive lockdowns in China that were really terrible, really bad for the population, especially in Shanghai, for example, is one of the cases that is described in more detail. It was really horrible. And an example of this overextension of the authoritarian engineering state. What else? Well, Chapter 6, Fortress China, explains how in the during Xi Jinping, especially his later years, China has become more self-centered, has adopted a more hostile attitude towards the United States. It's been a mutual phenomenon. Trump's presidency, the first one and the second one, are notorious for having an anti-China policy with strong tariffs and goals of hurting Chinese industrial rise. This policy has backfired spectacularly. So, for example, one of the things that is explained in the book is that after the selling of technical, really complex chips to China was implemented, well, the big Chinese manufacturers just started buying them from new Chinese companies, which they wouldn't have done before. This has contributed more to China's industrial capabilities and autonomy. The state really pushes not only for a strong industrial policy and a strong industrial base and a big number of workers, but also for like controlling different aspects of different industries. And China is not being outsourced now. The labor and the industries are not being outsourced. Even the low capital intensive and the low qualification ones are not being just shipped off to other countries in Asia. But this comes at a price also of a very authoritarian, close-minded regime, which is really bad for the social sciences and the humanities. And those people, the creative types, they have to leave China. And that is described in different chapters, but also in Chapter 6. And finally, Chapter 7, Learning to Love Engineers. It wraps up the message, this idea that, we need to have this marriage to some degree between an engineering society and a lawyerly society that respects rights. The author is more inclined towards the American model, like in the discussions of will China overcome, defeat, displace the United States as a big world power. The author tends to believe that it's unlikely that China will completely displace America, and most people will prefer living in America-like societies. He does say that in some areas China will probably outmatch the United States unless the United States starts changing to a more building engineering type of mentality, like in heavy industry and important sectors. China has become a big player and it will remain so economically. He is very critical and very skeptic about the possibility of China like convincing others to join on its team, because China is just, too ruthless, too very indifferent internally and externally to things like persuading and convincing other people. And, its ruthless disregard for the rights of individuals and individual mentality, pushes out some of the brightest and most innovative and entrepreneurial persons away, which, there was a time when they were building in China, but some of them, got crushed by periodic random actions of the state. Like in China, one of the things I learned in this book as well, even the rich people are not safe from random decisions of the state to just crush a complete economic sector and write it off. Okay, overall, to conclude, really interesting book. Reads like a novel. I can only say good things about this book. It's my second read of the year, and I think it's going to remain one of my favorite books of 2026. Take a look at it, give it a go, and you can tell me in the comments if you liked it as much as I did or not. Thank you.